Please enjoy this message from David Arquette sent in by the fabulous Carrie Tenney.
Hey Ryan, how are you? Thanks for doing the Scream podcast.
Like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
You are listening to Scream with Ryan C. Showers, the podcast for Scream fans just like you. Join Ryan every week as he takes a deep dive into the horror film series that defined the 90s and redefined the genre. Scream with Ryan C. Showers is your source for scene and quote analysis, character dissections, and the latest news about upcoming installments of the Scary Movie franchise.
I hear you like horror movies, Curly, but do you like them as much as him?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Scream with Ryan C. Showers. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. I truly appreciate everybody out there who supports the podcast either by listening every week, supporting me on social media, or subscribing to the Patreon. So if you haven't subscribed to the Patreon of Scream with Ryan C. Showers, there are so many amazing opportunities that come along with this. So in season 6, we're offering what I'm calling 30 Years of Scream, 30 Questions, a Scream with Ryan C. Showers interview. So this will be offered to eligible patrons after 3 months of subscription. You get to come on with me for 30 minutes and have an interview where I ask you 30 speedrun questions, but also some deep questions about Scream and your Scream personality and what Scream means to you and how you've also experienced Scream since it's come back to life in the mainstream. That is available now. We are currently in season 6. So subscribe to the Patreon and get on the list to come on and have your 30 Years of Scream, 30 Questions interview with me. In addition, joining the Patreon gets you access to our community group chats on Instagram. You can come to the group Zooms, which are held quarterly, and the eligibility to come on the podcast with me for main topic episodes by request. Also with the Patreon comes a monthly bonus episode. For most months, I'm going to be releasing an audio commentary of a Scream movie or a Scream-related film. Some months we'll be releasing a group Zoom episode on Patreon that is just released to the Patreon, not the public. I need to thank the producers of the podcast. They include TJ Jones, who does all of the graphic design work for the episode title cards. I need to thank Ashely Summers, who is my Taylor Swift girl. She helps me with the Taylor Swift song of the week, but also with the Scream game of the week that you can find on Instagram. Usually we post on Wednesday or Thursday mornings, and you can find her at SquirrelandSpud9 on Instagram. And I also need to thank my friend Fernando. He is FN Prescott on Instagram, and he also runs the Isabel May Online Instagram profile. He helps me with posts throughout the week to keep the social media and Scream love alive. I've had many wonderful experiences and adventures with this podcast, including being on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. Back in 2022, I was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal. So crazy. But none of this would be possible without the people who follow me and support me on social media. So if you haven't subscribed to my profiles there, I'm Scream with RCS across social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc. Also, if you could please do me a solid and give me 5 stars on Apple or Spotify, that would really go a long way and help me out. In addition, I need to thank the stab investors and daddy ghost faces of Scream with Ryan C. Showers. First, Mama Ghostface, I need to thank Carrie Tenney. I also need to thank daddy ghost faces Corey Wilson, Brett Janovich, and Andrew Dominguez. I need to thank stab investors, including Josh Carr, Amar Karim, Kevin Abner, Ali, Roy Garza, P. Dougie05, Gustavo Mora, Mark Vieira, Scream Queens Podcast, both Josh and Justine, Joey Nobarini, aka The Vault, Ryan Not Dying Young, David D, Jess Mariano, Sam Levy, Tamika Jones, Cameron Gasway, Josh Camillari, Ivan Valance, Christian Ranke, and John Cardy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Scream with Ryan C. Showers. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. I'm sitting here with my friend Isa. Hey, Isa.
Hello, Ryan. Nice to be here.
I'm really excited about this topic. You suggested this topic literally over a year ago. And I was like, this is great. I love it. let's hold off until after Scream 7 just because it's so relevant. And like, I really wanted to capture Scream 7 in the topic. So today, Issa and I are going to be talking about the concept of the final girl. So we talk about final girls all the time as it relates to the genre, horror, whatever. But with this episode, we're going to be talking about the evolution of the final girl and how final girls have been around since the 70s with people like Laurie Strode. Some people would argue earlier than that, through now, and kind of how the concept has changed over time. And we'll talk about some examples and kind of like defining what a final girl is. And obviously, we're of course related back to Scream. So I'm really excited about the topic. So thank you for suggesting it, Issa.
My pleasure. I love final girls, so I love talking about them.
Before we get going, why don't you hit me with your updated Scream ranking and what are your thoughts on Scream 7?
Well, I love Scream 7, and I'll say in my rankings remains 2, 1, 7, 4, 3, 5, and 6. Yeah.
I love that. It's like a dream to have like 7 right there. It's almost like Halloween, it's just like the H2O coming up with the original. So I love that it was fulfilled for you.
It had a lot of the things that I always wanted to see. It's not perfect, but that's also part of why it's so good.
Okay, moving on to the main topic. Let's talk about the evolution of final girls. I hear this a lot from people. Like people call anybody who survives a final girl. Is that how you understand it? Sydney is obviously the final girl. I think Gail, after you've been in fucking 7 movies and you've survived each of them, and you're basically a co-lead, you have the second or third most screen time in the majority of the films, you can be called a final girl. Sam, final girl. Laurie Strode, final girl. Nancy, final girl. Do we count everybody else? Do we count Kirby as a final girl? Do we count Mindy as a final girl? Do we count Tatum as a final girl at this point? I don't know. There's a gray space. I would say yes to Tatum, but I kind of want to say no to Mindy because Mindy's such a supporting role, comedic relief. I don't know. Like, what do you think? I'm being too harsh? Like, and also, isn't the words literally final girl, not final girls or survivors?
Yeah.
It's like there's supposed to be one, and that's kind of like the concept and how it originated back in the day with, say, Sally Haggerty from Texas Chainsaw. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's like Jill Roberts says in Scream 4, people love a sole survivor. But I agree with you. I feel like a lot of people are survivors. They're not exactly the final girl. Because what I think is that the final girl is usually the target, which is why I think Tatum is the final girl, because she was targeted, because she's Sydney's daughter. It wasn't a way to hurt Sydney, but she was still targeted. And if Gail had just shown up in the first movie and then never returned, she would have been a survivor because Gail inserted herself in that dangerous situation. She wasn't being harassed or anything like that. And I think sort of like the same thing happened in Scream 2. She just went there because she needed the fame and to make more money off the movie. But by the time of Scream 3, I think she became someone targeted because they knew they were going to hurt Sydney one way or another. And definitely, I'll say that starting from Scream 6, she's definitely the final girl in Scream 6 for me.
I think this is actually a wonderful place to start the discussion about the final girl and the idea of being targeted. That's brilliant. I love that because think about Scream. Sydney is the main character in Scream 2, but Gail is a co-lead in a way. She and Scream 3, but Mrs. Loomis is not just targeting Sydney. She's targeting both of them, and we see this repeatedly throughout. Gail is as much of a target as Sydney is in some ways. It's just we're kind of trained in our minds because of Scream 1 to assume Sydney is just the central target and not really consider that Gail is a co-target. So there's that, but I also just want to go back to Kirby. I've had this on my phone for years. I wrote this thing out about Kirby once. You could look at Scream 4 and think, Kirby is kind of the target in a way, or she's kind of like the final girl in a way. I know she doesn't have the screen time, but she's the one who's on the phone with Ghostface. She has the 2 big phone calls with Ghostface, and almost no character other than Sydney has ever had 2 phone calls with Ghostface in a movie. So there's that, but also the killers are her best friend and the guy she's kind of flirting with, her romantic interest. And when you combine those 2 things and just the general focus on and emphasis on Kirby as opposed to everyone else in the cast, you could kind of look at it and squint and be like, oh, she's kind of a final girl in Scream 4. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, actually, that makes perfect sense. I totally forgot about the 2 phone calls. And actually, it makes perfect sense because at the time with Scream 4, we just assumed Jill was going to be the new Sydney. But of course, she couldn't be on the phone all the time. She couldn't be chased all the time because she was one of them.
She's almost like a final girl in hiding. Like they're hiding the fact that she is the final girl and like how she thinks about Jill and how much the weight of her best friend being behind this, And she has so many scenes with Charlie. It's like kind of a running thing throughout the film that it's like a will they, won't they, will they, won't they. And then they finally do kiss. and then he ends up being the killer, and it's a very personalized thing. Like, he's mad at Kirby specifically. To be a final girl, you have to have ingredients like that. It can't just be oh, you survived, you are default a final girl, right? And that's why I think Gail earns it in Scream 2 and then onward. I think Tatum, for the reasons you said, is a final girl because she is targeted and she does go through this transformation. We mentioned like this idea of like the sole survivor, because that is what the final girl is supposed to be. So let's talk about like the origins and the concept of a final girl. And it's so crazy to me to think about the concept of the final girl from the 60s, 70s to now. What are your thoughts on the evolution of how the final girl has changed, like big picture?
I believe that there was a time in cinema in the 60s or the 70s that there were a lot of women on screen, but not a lot of women had important roles necessarily. A lot of women weren't the heroes or the main focus, or always the third act will be saved in a way by a male character. It didn't matter if that male character have been an important part of the movie before that at all. It was just that you needed like the man to always come to the end to solve the mystery, to save the girl, or do whatever you need. And horror started to show women as a way to show that they could handle the devil by themselves. And there were like some initial experiences with that with the giallo films in Italy. There were some very cool French films from the 60s too, when the women are just this submissive person that's just taking all the horror until someone comes to save them. A lot of them start to fight back. And I think it was all done though unaware of what they were doing really. But I feel like it started in the 70s that they were like, okay, let's start to move. Let's find that we have this core group of women. Let's focus on one specifically and see how she gets out of it. And I think that's a pattern that started to get repeated over and over. And then the final girl started to become what they are now. But it definitely shows also how much it's changed because of the times that these movies were made. Not the 70s was not the same context for women that it was in the 80s or the 90s or that it is now.
Yeah. So what do you think was the best era for final girls?
It is very hard because I do love the 80s. It was just such a hell of a time. And we got tons of movies, so we got tons of final girls. A lot of them very, two-dimensional. A lot of them just were, following the pattern, be like, okay, we're going to have all these characters. At least one girl has to survive, and she will be the final girl. But it never felt very personal. But I feel like the 80s was a great time to find different kind of girls, that the final girl doesn't have to be one, although most of them are, of course, white women, but because most of the slasher films were made in America, I think the 80s were a fun time to experiment and find all different kinds of wacky stories to put these women into these awful situations, but how they found different ways to survive. Sometimes they kept it realistic, and other times they went maybe supernatural. I think that's what makes it great about the 80s. I don't know if it's the best one for final girls, because I feel like the 21st century has definitely shown us different final girls, but real. They are three-dimensional final girls. We have final girls that we hate, that we love to hate, but that we just love, and we connect with them the same way we connected with Sydney back then.
Yeah. I'm going to be basic. I'm going with the 90s as my favorite era for the final girls, just because, and I have a reason. I have evidence to back this up. So the whole concept and even the term final girls comes from an academic whose name is Carol J. Clover. She wrote this book called Men, Women, and Chainsaws. And this is where the term final girl was first originated. And so it's interesting because she wrote this. This was published in 1992. And if you read the text and if you've ever like looked into this and what she wrote and how she described the final girls, she presented final girls in her view as anti-feminist, in line with more traditional views of femininity versus like women who are empowered. I think that like there's no way that if she would have written this book in 1998 versus 1992, the introduction of Sidney Prescott changes everything. She is the opposite of what Miss Clover argued in her book. I agree with you, though. Just to go back, you talked about like the rules for women and the type of like how women in film and TV function in a way. I think that being a final girl is one of the best parts you could ever have as a female actor, because there's so much to do. The emotion involved, the action, there's so many dynamics at play, the opportunities to act and really show yourself. I just feel like it's the type of role where you can actually truly get in there and do so much, as opposed to even in dramas or comedies sometimes. They're more boxed in. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you have to balance that. It's exhausting both physically and emotionally. In drama movies, you get probably exhausted by always trying to get the emotions, but the physicality, the fighting, the running, and sometimes a lot of horror movies also have a lot of comedy, you know?
Yeah.
So you also have to be, people have to laugh with you, people have to get emotional with you, people have to cry with you, people have to cheer you on to keep going and keep fighting the bad guy. It has a little bit of everything.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think it could be like a very complete role.
I never would have assumed that anybody would have thought the concept of Final Girls was regressive. Miss Clover, she would point to like the fact that like, say Laurie Strode, she fights, but she's saved by a man. She's kind of stalked by a creepy guy. She's tormented, and then she's saved by a man. And the Final Girl and the concept of the Final Girl, they evolve in the 80s, and like it's kind of wrapped up. And then because the 1980s were about like, it was like that was the Ronald Reagan era of politics, of like, regression and feminism in a lot of ways. But, so there's like a lot of like religious stuff wrapped into it. And it shows in Randy's rules, right? Only the good girls, the virgins who play by the rules and are pure, they're the ones who get to survive. I think that is like the sexist point of view that Carol Clover was taking to it. But even then, I still think like roles like Ellen Ripley, Jess, even Laurie Strode, I think are very feminist characters. Nancy from A Nightmare on Elm Street. Those characters I find to be incredibly feminist, empowering. They show agency, they show strength. What are your thoughts on the idea of feminism wrapped up in the concept of the Final Girls pre-Scream, I should say?
I think that was part of the issue, that they concluded Final Girls because it had to be a woman to survive by the end. But that woman didn't need to have any personality of their own or any substance. There were cases where there was, but I feel like a lot of people just read the Final Girls as that instead of reading it as a woman that saves her life. And by saving her life, she saves a lot of other people's lives. And I think that is feminist thing, but it's not in a way that it has to show that just because a woman doesn't survive doesn't mean she's not a feminist or anything like that. And the thing is that also horror in general has been criticized for focusing a lot of violence against women, but because in the real world, the women are the ones that have to deal with a lot of violence and had to deal with a lot of other smaller kind of threats, the paranoia or like walking alone at night and all that stuff. So I feel like it just reflects what happened in the real world, that women are always more lean to be vulnerable. And I think the situation about like, don't have sex, don't drink or anything is because in a way puts the fault on them, because you're already vulnerable by being a woman. But if you put yourself in those situations, you're making yourself more vulnerable. So I feel like you're making your chances of dying or getting murdered bigger. But at the same time, it's all like a theory after all. That's why rules exist, also to be broken. That's what happens in Scream,
Well, but isn't that like also the greatness of the concept of the Final Girls and the evolution from a more reserved Final Girl in Laurie Strode through today, and seeing even Sidney Prescott in action in Scream 7. As society has evolved and shifted over these 50 years, so has the concept of the Final Girls, the way that they're written, the way they're performed, the way that they're directed. And that's part of the beauty of this concept. It's key to emphasize, it's not just that they survive. Fighting to survive is chapter 1, but chapter 2 is how they're surviving, And like the end of the day, I find Final Girls to be very symbolic and kind of like a staple of empowerment. I don't see them necessarily just as like torture porn for, just being traumatized and terrorized for our consumption, because part of that, and maybe I'm just so into the weeds of Scream and of Sydney and even Laurie Strode, for instance, or Ellen Ripley. I mean, I'm so into the good Final Girls or the well done Final Girls where I don't see them as being like victimized. I see them as being empowered, and confronting the evil and confronting the abusive people that are tormenting them in their lives. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I feel like they're not victims, and that's exactly why they get targeted in a way, because they're like, you're doing this thing that it's always an external force that thinks that they should be victims, and they're trying to turn them into victims, and they keep fighting because they know they're not victims.
And like, I guess like also kind of like tying in what we're talking about in terms of Final Girls kind of rising to an occasion, right? In addition to having Final Girls in general being great opportunities for women to act, is they get to transform, being more innocent, more reserved. And as they're tormented and as they're hunted and as they face evils, they transform into fierce fighters that show intelligence and instinct, and they can outlast things with just their sheer willpower. And they go from perhaps even victim to relentlessly trying to survive, and relentlessly being a fighter. And I think that that display of strength, I think is a very human and emotional thing. And it's something that I think a lot of people like. So for me, as a gay man, found so much of myself and my sense of self from people like Sydney and Gail, from Buffy, from people who we would consider to be final girls because of, I guess, feeling like the way that they stand up and the way that they rise up is the way that like I kind of got through hard times, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I started watching horror movies since I was so young, like 8 years old, probably too young to watch those movies, but it definitely shaped my identity so much. At the same time that I was coming to terms with my sexuality and how that will be perceived in the outside world, because the problem is not what we feel or what we like. The problem is how the world's going to react to it. And women go through that issue all the time as well. And based on their life decisions, we see that also happening to Jess in Black Christmas and all the way to Sydney. And Sydney's struggling this problem in one that she's first of all dealing with the murder of her mom, which is already an awful situation, but also because she's figuring out that her mom wasn't who she used to be. And she gets to see, that the way that other people perceived her. And that's the only thing she can talk about until in the end, it's not like it gets figured out, but she finally gets the answers. And she doesn't hesitate. Even though she knows she's not the same person as Ghostface, she knows she has to kill the bad guy because it's her movie. So she knows what she has to do. But so she follows the rules at the same time as she breaks them. I think that's also what kind of makes a final girl survive.
That's literally Sydney, is that she follows certain rules and she breaks others. And I think something about Sydney that makes her such a great defining final girl is because she comes to her story already kind of in a sad place, in a broken place of the trauma of her mother. So you have that, but then with Sydney, you also have the self-awareness. And then you have the idea of her challenging the pure final girl, that she shows a different level of agency that other final girls and slashers in particular just never were given the chance to, never given the choice to. So I think I think that's something that makes Sydney Prescott very, very different as a final girl.
Yeah, because Sydney learns that it's not as easy. In the first one, but she questions all of that. That like, I'm the dumb girl with big breast check who can act, who runs up the stairs. Like that's what she ends up doing later on in the scene. But because it wasn't that easy to go through the front door, So I think like she also understands like in practicality, once she goes through it, it's not that easy, to follow the rules when it's happening to you. Because once you're on it, life doesn't work as a movie, and you have to act fast. So I think that's also very thrilling about watching horror and experiencing horror because you don't have time to think. You just have to move.
Let's talk about the traits and the characteristics of a final girl. So I think that these are some good descriptions of like what a final girl is. Historically, how would we describe a final girl, or the concept? We can bend it and it can be flexible because there's room for people like Weathers, even if they're mostly defined by these. Okay, but here's what I think. So I think literally being able to survive. So just surviving your film, right? I think with a lot of final girls we've seen over the history of film and cinema, and it's still true today, and it still should be true today, is like most of the time the final girl is somebody who is morally upright and they're responsible. They're generally good on the inside. And that we've seen Scream try to push the boundaries of that with Sam. And it's, some people like the fact that they are subverting this aspect of the final girl. Some people don't. One thing that we've seen in especially like final girls in older films is an observance, an awareness to the threat, perhaps earlier than other characters. We see this in Halloween all the time. Like Laurie is the one who recognizes the weirdness of that car. But also you can extend it to, Tina and Halloween 5. You can extend it to Rachel and Halloween 4 and Jamie, of course. So it's the awareness that other people miss, that like the more sinful girls or the more vapid girls or the party, self-indulgent girls, that they are too busy having fun to notice the threat.
Yeah, I feel like Final Girl is someone that's aware. It's aware of her surroundings. It's aware that there's never a place where she can feel safe. And she's aware of her skills, but she's also aware, I think a final girl also needs to fight, knowing that she may not survive. Because I feel like the time when tables turn is when you get cocky. That's how the killers always get caught or they die, because they think they overpower her. And I think the final girl, once she gets into the fight knowing that there's a chance she might lose, she actually gets stronger that way.
Yeah.
And that's how she gets to outsmart the bad guy.
Totally. It's almost like, I think something that separates a final girl from a victim is, I think sometimes victims, and this is like, I'm going to disprove myself, but like, a final girl to me is someone who just pushes through, and she's not even aware that she could die. She's just trying so hard to get to the finish line. And versus sometimes victims, maybe there's more of an apathy, more of there's like, a lack of self-belief, a belief in yourself. And this is like, of course, what makes Helen Shiver's death so tragic is she pushes and she pushes and she pushes and she's right there and then she gets it. So, but
Yeah.
anyways, so okay. So next this is so Sydney, okay? It's resourcefulness, okay? It's the idea of showing intelligence and being creative in how you deploy your intelligence and strategy within a situation to overcome the threat of the stalker or the killer or the danger. It's, Sydney Prescott in Scream 3 with the extra gun, with the bulletproof vest. That's a true hallmark of the final girl. Or like, even Laurie Strode, I'm thinking in the original Halloween, the way that she breaks the glass with her hand. She punches through the glass just to get out of the kitchen when Michael's stalking her in the neighbor's house. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. Sydney is someone that has also, you can see her growth as the movies pass, because she doesn't face the killers in the same way in every movie. In Scream 1, it's all like she was caught off guard. She didn't know all this was happening. Scream 2, she walked into the theater not knowing that was like kind of like the trap, but she figured it out by seeing her surroundings. She didn't have a gun or anything like that, but she knew the place where she was in, and she knew how to use it, to her advantage. And that's what she did. She figured it out. In Scream 3, because she knew she was going through danger, she was carrying a gun, had the extra vest, and even when she's locked inside this room that she never been in before, she manages a way to hide, a way to like call Roman again, to like set him off and like find stuff. I feel like it has to be resourceful to what you know you can do, and also the place that you are. Find like your own kind of weapon or something that can save you, or at least save you some time. And Sydney does that masterfully.
The arc of the finale with Scream 3, when she kind of turns the tables on him, and in the way that you're saying, even like the way that she calls him, that is exactly this resourcefulness. I think Sydney represents this in the best way. And I know this is maybe a poor example because it's so on the nose, but Laurie Strode, in Halloween 2018, her whole storyline is you have to be prepared, but it is unfortunately, that. But okay, so here are some other traits I found in my research, and I like them, but they're also, one of them is very old fashioned. Okay. And that is androgyny, meaning, almost like a unisex kind of, genderless, masculine, maybe even masculine coded behavior. And the best example, I think, of this is, because it's funny, me as like a modern Sydney Prescott fan, I disagree with this because I think Sydney and Gale are very feminine. And I think the way that they present themselves and even fight is very feminine. But I think the best example of this is Ellen Ripley. She
Absolutely.
she's kind of, I don't want to say that she's manly, because her whole arc in Aliens is about being a mother, but there's something extremely masculine about that character, where you're not really even thinking about her as a woman or as a man. You're just thinking about her as like the final survivor, right? So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Ellen Ripley's a fascinating final girl. She's so different. And yeah, from the beginning, it doesn't come to discussion that she's a woman. And also because of the context of where the movies takes place, she doesn't deal with these young women situations that be like having sex or like working or anything like that. She's working, she's killing it, and she has a very strong voice, because it's not just about fighting the xenomorph, which she does amazingly, but the other people that she deals with on the ship. That's why I love in the first movie how she deals with the other people. She knows how to be sort of like a leader to them. So that's why Ellen Ripley is kind of like a very special final girl, and she's very different from the other ones. Not just because the movies are very different from like the general slasher films, but because she's such in a particular context that Ellen shows that how strong she is in other ways that it's not just physical.
Totally. And she is so strong. Like, honestly, I'm not saying this in any dig to the final girls that I love. I feel like Ellen Ripley is probably the strongest character. Like, there's just something about her where she feels like, and this is not to say because she is, in the big robot thing where she says, get away from her, you bitch. But there's something about her where she just feels like a skyscraper. Like, she is so solid, so bulletproof. Like, I would want her to protect me. Like, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So.
She's the closest we have to like a superhero, really. But we get to see her being human as well. In Aliens, that's also her arc is great because we get to see a different part of her, a more human side.
Yeah.
But that's why I hate when the people compare final girls to superheroes. They're not, because superheroes are never afraid. They're always brave. I haven't seen like the new movies, but like the stereotype of superheroes that I grew up with in the early 2000s was like there was this man who was very strong, very smart. Nothing can go through him. He'll always survive. The final girl is exactly the opposite. She's a person. And even though through all the hardships that these serial killers throw at her, she's resourceful and she manages to outsmart them one way or the other.
Isn't the point of the final girl is that on some level they are afraid and they're fighting through their fear. And I guess like for me, this is where, and again, Sam in Scream 6 just doesn't really work for me as a character, not only because of the moral stuff, but like I don't believe Sam is actually ever truly like afraid in Scream 6, not in the way that like Sydney was afraid or even Tara. I think Tara in Scream 5 was really afraid. She's actually a good representation of a final girl in Scream, I think, because she fights through her fear. She fights through her injuries in a way that Sam, we never really get to see Sam do. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why I think a lot of people liked or at least found Tara more relatable because she was pinned through, she was a pincushion at the end of 5, like Ricky said, but she still managed to fight through it and stuff. So I think that's what makes her so unique. And what Sam, I think it was supposed to show like a stronger side, and you can show a final girl that is strong, but you still have to show that she has some fear because you have to show that she's human, you know? And I think that's also that in 6 was lacking. I like the character arc of Sam in 6, but the third act kind of like blows it apart because we never see at any point her confidence wobble. And you kind of need that because we want her to survive. We want her to get them off and shoot them in the head or whatever. But you also need that moment where like that's moment of doubt. You always need that moment of doubt. And we have those I won't say in all the Scream movies, but there was always a moment like in 3 or in 4 that you were like, Sydney gonna make it? Just for this, it was just a second. You're like, she's gonna make it. You know she's gonna make it, but the geniusness of making you doubt for a single second, that's what makes it more like emotional for you. Yeah, because you're like, that's how much you love the character.
So I want to go back to earlier. My second characteristic, and I kind of blazed through it, is the idea like the morally upright, responsible, good, person of being a final girl. I read something once that said that Sydney survives in Scream through her goodness, and Sam survives through her darkness. Or she uses her darkness, and that's what she uses to survive. So Sydney uses her goodness to survive. Sam uses her darkness to survive. What are your thoughts on that? That Sam is using an evil part of her to survive, whereas Sydney is using the best parts of her to survive.
Yeah, I think because not to say that Sam is not a good person, but Sydney always been like at her core a good person. That's why she keeps trusting people, and that's why it was always so heartbreaking for her to find out this other people were like betraying her over and over. Like in Scream 2, she was dating again already after the experience. She was trusting, and I feel like she was more heartbroken by the fact that knowing that Mickey was a killer than when she had the suspicion of Derek. I feel like that broke her heart even more, and it broke her trust. In 4, she ran off to save Jill when she was the one holding the knife, and I feel like that's the good thing about Sydney. She knows how to get to the evil side to survive, but she is always a good person. I think Sam struggles, not because she's not a good person, but I think the way that knowing where she comes from after she's being lied to for a long time, knowing who her dad is, it makes her being more aware that she has a violent, dark side inside of her. And she's afraid of letting it out because she doesn't want to be like Billy. That's something that separates her from being a ghost face. But at the same time, I think she lets it out, and she kind of like, she has a moment that I think she enjoys it. I don't think Sydney enjoys it. She does it to survive. Yeah. But I think Sam does have those moments in both 5 and 6 that she enjoys it. And it would have been interesting to see that deepen a little bit more. But I do love the fact in Scream 6, I love the final scene where she's seeing the mask and then she just dumps it and goes behind Tara because she's like, yes, she loves that dark side, but she's choosing the good side. She's choosing to be with Tara, with who is like the best part of her.
And I guess that's a good argument for her that she is upholding this part of being a final girl and like choosing the good as opposed to the bad. I guess like for me, like let's just say, the rumor was true. Let's just say that they were making the real Scream 7 and Sam would have become the ghost face. At what point do we balance the darkness, with the idea of the final girl? Let's just say she did become Ghostface. She was the villain, killing her friends, how would we reckon with that? Like it's so uncomfortable to think about,
Yeah, I always thought like if they were wanted to go that route, I feel like they would do something like killing Tara or doing something that really is going to leave Sam with the idea that she doesn't have anything left to fight for. So might as well destroy everything that surrounded her.
Yeah.
I think it wouldn't be in the sense that the reveal would have been that it is her. I feel like it would have turned into like a Ghostface versus Ghostface situation that we never had in
Mhm.
Scream, and it will be interesting to see at some point. So like the idea
Right.
that Kevin had in 5, that I feel like Sam goes through this awful tragedy that kind of turns her into a villain, and she has to face this other Ghostface by kind of turning into the same monster herself. But that would have been a very, very sensitive topic. I don't know how they would have handled it. I think it's interesting, but I don't know if it's something that it would have worked in the Scream world. Because also, if we wanted to bring Cindy back and Cindy had to kill Sam, it wouldn't have been the same either, because Sam
Yeah.
was an important character for 2 films. She was the final girl in Scream 6. So it wouldn't have been as easy to solve it in just one movie, I think.
It would have been devastating. Tara dies in the opening, and then Sam turns into Ghostface. She kills Chad and Mindy. She hurts Gail. Sydney is there, and she's the one to stop it. She's the one to stop Billy Loomis's daughter as she's become Billy Loomis. To see Sydney kill Sam would be devastating. It would be visceral. It would be so uncomfortable, but not in a good way. Because sometimes those emotions in films can elicit the greatest things. And maybe it would have been great. It could have been great. But the idea of like, oh, we've spent 2 films with this person who now turns out to be this villain, that would be hard.
Yeah, because we saw them fight together in 5, and even though we don't get to see them bond or anything like that, it still would have been heartbreaking because while Sydney stopped being the face of Scream, even for just one movie, it was Sam's face that we cheer for. And see them like combat and one killing the other, that would have been very heartbreaking.
Yeah, no, I agree. So, well, let's move on. So one last thing I want to describe in these characters. Well, I have others, but in like this first round is the final girl has to take an active role, meaning, she is the one who picks up a weapon and fights back. And we see this all the time. We see this in every, iteration of the final girl, whether we're talking about, Laurie in 78, or whether we're talking even about Gail Weathers in Scream 6. Gail Weathers fights back in Scream 6. She has the gun. Even in a limited role like that, she is a fighter. She's active against the killer. So, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the final girl has to be proactive in a way. She has to find a way to help and stop the bad guy. Like the girl we see in Scream 6 is very fierce, but the one we see in Scream 7, she's still very vulnerable physically and emotionally. And I don't necessarily mind the fact that she was in the third act because she kills the first Ghostface halfway through the movie in a very amazing way. So she found a way to be like, no, she can fight him with her hands. Maybe she doesn't trust herself with a gun or something, but she sees the guy, she has the car. So she has the advantage that she uses it. I think that's what makes a final girl, because also something that can get overlooked, that the final girl has to be present maybe in the climax. And Gail is not in 6 and 7, but she's still part of the final girl. She's still there and she still fights the evil. So I think it's a very important role for the final girl to figure out a way to use something to her advantage to, like I said, end the guy or at least save herself sometime.
Let's pivot to now, like what Randy says about the final girl, the rules to surviving a horror movie as a final girl, the idea that he represents in Scream 1. So my favorite thing, as I was doing research and also thinking about what Randy says, is that the final girl is traditionally adolescent, okay? Like she's usually like a young, pure, goody two-shoes girl who's quiet and innocent. And, maybe she doesn't fit in with the popular kids who are committing all of the sinful acts, okay? That's how I kind of see what Randy is talking about. The final girl who's doing everything right, like a good little church girl who plays by the rules, and that ensures her survival. I think that's a lot of the coding of and like the social messaging of a lot of like older slashers, maybe in the 80s, right? Is that kind of pure thing. And I think it's interesting, the idea of like an adolescent girl, because if there's one thing you can say about that version of the final girl, say Sally or Laurie in the 70s, to now, where Laurie Strode, we see her as a grandma. We see her, this elderly woman, going up against Michael Myers in Halloween 2018 and Halloween Ends. And we see Sidney Prescott, not past her prime, and to use her words, fighting as a mom, approaching probably, 50 years old. I think that is so cool to see that the final girl isn't just limited to a young, teenager, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think now you can find more stories where the final girls are women in their 30s, their 40s, and stuff. And what's so awesome about this franchise is that we see the final girl grow a lot. There is no situation where we see a new one coming up every single movie, which is kind of like what Friday the 13th did. But I think it's just because they couldn't find something or that organically, a woman that could come back in every single movie or build this connection with the villain, that this tool that the villain has on them. because even after they dropped the brother sister thing on Halloween for the last trilogy, there's still this toll that Michael has on Laurie, that even though Michael is not actively chasing her, she's chasing him because she knows he's out there, and so she has to end him to finish that threat that is still lingering. And while Sydney never is facing danger, when danger comes knocking, she has to fight it because she knows there's no other way. And if another one comes, she's always stronger than the next one. It was something I love about seeing the final girl come back all the time, especially Sydney, is that we see new blind spots that she has. And that's also what makes a good final girl, because a final girl is all these things that we mentioned. She's resourceful, she's smart, she's quick, but there has to be something she's missing. And that's what the villains always use against her. I feel like in Scream 4, her love, well, not even her love, because we know from the beginning that she's not close to her cousin or to her aunt, but she still have that sense of family. Family is so important. Even after her brother tried to murder her, it's like, family is so important. So this guy's after Jill, so I have to go right onto that. And she ended up walking into the trap because Jill was behind it all. And it's like, and she wasn't that much prepared, because I think she was so much more emotionally invested in it. She didn't have the time she had in Scream 3 to like think ahead. But also in Scream 3, she was in a police station. So it's kind of easier for her to find, the paraphernalia she needed. And that's also what makes it like so important. In Scream 7, she's aware that that her daughter is the blind spot. And I think she's always so cautious not to mess up, because she knows the villains have something that they can use against her. So I think that's also why I love Sydney always coming back.
And isn't it interesting that Sydney has different blind spots in different movies? Scream 1, it's her stubbornness about her mother, right? And like the cotton weary of it all. And then in Scream 2, it's the Derek of it all. It's the boyfriend. It's the paranoia about Derek. In Scream 3, I think it's her mother, of course, but also the idea of being around people and protecting herself. And like she's going above and beyond, and she does protect herself, but that doesn't mean Gail and Dewey aren't protected. And she's been living alone, so it's like she has to face it, and she has to save them, and she has to face this part of her mother, right? Scream 4, perfect. They use Jill as the catnip for Sydney that's sensitive, because all of her family is gone. She only has this cousin she doesn't even know that well, so she wants to protect it. And the same again with her. And in Scream 5, you could say her blind spot was Dewey. Dewey's death and how she came back to town, even though she said she swore she wouldn't. So, and then in Scream 7, of course, it's the ultimate weakness. It's the parent aspect. Oh my God, it's so good. Great observation. I love that. So, in Scream 7 per se, we see 3 different versions of the final girl. That's always been the cool thing about Scream, is not only, to your point, it's been the opposite of Friday the 13th with a new final girl each time, where the villain was centered. Scream did the opposite and said, no, this is the story of the final girl. Scream is. And not only just the one final girl, but the 2 final girls. We have Sydney and we have Gail, who couldn't be more opposite. And Gail has this evolution kind of from bad to good, which I guess is a virtue of the final girl, because as we know, final girls are supposed to inherently be moral and upstanding good people on the inside. I think having 2 different versions of a final girl in Scream with Sydney and Gail over the franchise has been really important. But then also now you have Tatum, who is like, again, unlike any of them, she is so vulnerable and pure, and like she's not seen as strong, and she kind of has to grow into that, which is another really cool, I would even say retro take on the final girl.
Yeah, it will be. I was always surprised when I saw it for the first time how Tatum reminded me so much of Laurie Strode, for example.
Yeah.
And it was like, but that makes perfect sense. I mean, if we have seen Halloween in a different way, or maybe Halloween 2 would have developed differently and Laurie had more active role, that could have been Laurie in the end. So I think that's always so fascinating. And I always love how people fight a lot over Gail, because the thing is that the final girls are people. So they're like, they come and go. It's like sometimes they have like moments of like extreme kindness or extreme meanness. And Gail plays a lot with that. And there are situations when you kind of get very annoyed by her and be like, girl, have you learned nothing? But at the same time, she did. But she's just also kind of like dealing with such specific trauma in the way that she can figure out at the time. And then she comes through it. At the end of the day, she is so iconic and so lovable for how real she is. Which I feel like Sydney, sometimes they always lean her into this virtuous woman, even through all the mistakes she makes. But I think Scream 7 kind of changed that, because Sydney is still not like this virtuous person anymore. Well, she never was. But I feel like people still had her as like, Sydney's the good one and Gail is the good bad one. And it's not. They're both very different, but they both have their moments when they have to let their bad parts show. Gail is just not afraid to show them.
That's so funny to put it like that, because, Sydney has always been more dimensional than what people give her credit for. And in a way, we see over and over again the real life human version of Sidney Prescott, who, she does have flaws and blind spots. The ultimate blind spot is, and I don't want to say flaw, but like the stubbornness she has about Cotton Weary in Scream 1, that's kind of like her tragic flaw in a way, because that's, of course, loops into the Ghostface killings. And then we see in Scream 7, she's very closed off when it comes to her daughter. It's never that she's bad, it's just that she's flawed. And I think it's funny how the Stab fans and like the people in real life in Scream, like within the Scream world, they make Sydney into that two-dimensional, kind of virtuous slasher final girl.
Absolutely. And Sydney is stubborn, and we see that happening through every single movie. She has the different ways when we see her that there's something she just doesn't want to see. In Scream 2, she's just so paranoid about Derek being the killer and be like, oh my God, am I repeating the situation all over again? That she doesn't get to see all the other people that can be suspects,
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what Randy was there for. But he didn't have the conversation with her about it. If that had been the case, maybe it would have been different. But Sydney had her trust issues with Derek. But it was like, yeah, but there's a lot more people in your life. Why don't you just take a look at all of them? And that's what she doesn't do. And that's why she also gets betrayed one more time. And in Scream 3, she's so caught up in her solitude. It's like I love that scene she has with her dad in Scream 3 when she's like, yeah, you're safe. But at the same time, it's, what are you really doing? What was the point of your life? You're going to be here alone forever? Because in a way, they're also winning, because you're not living your life. You're not showing yourself. You're not. In Scream 4, she wrote a book and she's talking about it, and then her damn cousin decides to take the spotlight, but Sydney won't let her, because it's like, it's not about the spotlight, it's about being good. It's like, no, you don't deserve the spotlight. You're not a good person.
Well, and isn't it interesting that Sydney says in Scream 7 that she wanted to show people that there was life after trauma?
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of how she moved on. So everything that you said with like Scream 3 and 4 of Sydney, she does move on from that. She is out in the world with people, and she is moving on from just talking about the trauma. She's showing that there is life after trauma. And I think, like, if you look at what Clover said in her essay about the final girl in 92, I think Clover would say that the final girls are more defined by their victimhood rather than their strength. And I think that, if anything, Sidney Prescott, how she continues to evolve over time is by showing that there is life after trauma. And that's the version of Sydney we see in Scream 7.
Yeah, that's why we see a different Sydney in every movie, because she finds a new way, a new normal every single time after what she goes through. That's why I think it was such a lost chance we didn't get to see her more develop in 5, because she shows up in the end, and it's a great scene. I think I like the way that I like her role in the climax and stuff, but we don't get to see her really as a character. Where is she in life? We know she has kids, and that's kind of it. So that's why I love, like, in 7, how she's still, like, even after she opened up in 4 and everything went to hell one more time, and still in 7, she's not traveling the world, she's not telling anybody about her life, but she's still living in a community, she's still talking to people, she's very social. Well, she trusted the neighbor, which was a mistake, but she's still trying, and finding new ways to be normal. And she decides to have kids, which I think after all the stuff she went through, like, who would have kids?
Yeah.
But I feel like she's strong, and she knows she can take it. And she made mistakes with her kids, which also shows that how real of a woman she is.
And isn't that like the statement of a final girl to choose to have kids, knowing that there is a threat? She's not going to, like, you kind of said that about Scream 3. Like, yes, you're protecting yourself, you're winning, but what are you winning from? What are you winning for? You know what I mean? If you're just going to be alone in the woods by yourself for the rest of your life. And I think by having children, Sydney's saying, I'm not going to be defined by my victimhood. I'm going to be defined by my strength and by them. And I think that's where perhaps Clover's analysis of the final girl as more sexist than feminist is a bit incorrect. But there is an argument, do you think that a final girl needs to endure significant trauma in order to be empowered? I think that was a question that Clover was kind of playing with in this book. I wouldn't say it in those terms, but I think life is traumatic. We all go through trauma. Every single one of us will go through a hard time. You know what I mean? And I think that's part of what makes it feminist, because we're seeing women stand up and getting to act in this way, in the face of horrible things happening,
Yeah, it's just a sense of danger. It's not, the event doesn't necessarily have to be traumatic, but it's had to be in a situation when you're at the most vulnerable. You have everything to lose, but you figure out a way to go outside of it, being a winner. And maybe the aftermath will be hard, but it's all about like how you face it. And a lot of these times we don't know because something that happened like in the new Halloween trilogy is that Laurie's defined by her trauma. That's all she is. She lives her life based on her trauma, which is a very interesting take. But I do think that not final girls have to live by that time. You could start the sequel with a final girl living a totally healthy, happy life, and she's dealing with that because that's how life is. But I don't think we have seen outside of the Scream franchise a lot of situations where we see the final girl dealing with the aftermath. And the aftermath not being the sole thing that rules her life. I think that's mostly what I've been seeing. And hopefully that will change. I think a little bit we got it with Nancy in Dream Warriors when she has moved on, but she's also working hard to help these kids so they don't go through the same thing as hers. But I don't think that she is living her life in fear of Freddy coming back, But deep down, she knew, but she kept fighting till the end. Also, why it's so important about the final girl.
I want to ask you about like the difference in Laurie Strode. What are your thoughts on the 3 Halloween movies that just came out?
I felt like 2018 was a very different take on the trauma situation. I think the whole idea of having a whole house that it was one day she will use as a trap, I thought that was genius. I like the idea of Laurie just being this tough woman. I wasn't the biggest fan of her being this reclusive woman that completely traumatized her child. They ended up making her an alcoholic as well, just like in H2O, which I feel like if we're going to start anew, we can try a different approach. Maybe she's doing therapy or something, or she's like in recovery or something like that. But I do think that it's I like the Laurie in H2O better, mostly because she's trying to find a tiny bit of freedom in that cage that she built herself in, because she's still living in this gated community. She knows all the same people. She's running a school, but she's still like seeing someone, and she's just like sharing that with someone that she's learning to trust. She just can't trust her son because she wants to protect him from all the trauma she went through. We still get to see her as this vulnerable person. In 2018, she goes straight on into danger because okay, that's him. But I feel like that stubbornness can turn her very quickly. And I had a lot of mixed feelings, but I feel like in 2018, it was a very interesting take on her character. And I love the ending when she actually gets to work together with her family. My biggest issue is mostly related to the other 2 films that came afterwards. Not because of what happens necessarily. I just feel like it would have been done better. I feel like the ending we got wasn't built upon, It's like if you have... will be like in an Agatha Christie book. Like the ending it was the whole different person that we never see at all during the whole story. It was like, oh no, but it was this person that we met in the first chapter, but it was a different person. It's like, you want to watch a movie, and once you get the reveal, you're like, oh really? But then when you rewatch the movie, which happens in the Scream films, it's like, oh, there it is. Of course it was him or it was her. You see it right over there. I feel like the issue people have with 7 and 3, I feel like Scream 7 is the kind of the new Scream 3 based on all the hate that it's getting, because you can rewatch it and you may not see the clues because it's not as obvious.
Right.
Once you've seen all the other ones the first time, once you watch it the second time, you can see all the clues right in front of you. 3 and 7 are way more subtle with that. And that's why it gets people still mad about it, and they love to hate those. And that was my issue with Halloween, for example. Halloween Ends is a very different movie, and I feel like selling it as the third part in this trilogy was kind of lying to the audience, which is a calculated risk and can go either way. I know people love it, and that's great. I just hate it because nothing showed me that this could be the movie that was going to come up. The way that Kills ended is like, you show me exactly the opposite.
Right.
But I mean, it was bold, and I really admire the new take that they took. I wish I liked it, but I just don't. Sometimes it makes me frustrated with Kills as well, because we're like, okay, you had the chance with Kills at least to build a little bit to move on to Ends, but still you just, I think there was probably related to the fact that, the first 2 were thought mostly together. They were almost even shot together. And then the third one came way later on. It went through a lot of rewrites. We have COVID in the middle. I feel like a lot of changes happened, and we ended up that's part of the reason why we got such a different movie from the previous 2 films.
I think Halloween Ends, despite all of that, I think they show Laurie Strode as an interesting final girl who does move on. She is making efforts to make her life not about trauma, and try to be happy and to put the best foot forward. We see the cracks in it. We see, how it's not 100% solid for her, but I think she comes off as a much more healthy final girl.
Her stubbornness also, in the previous films, also put her family in danger. They say things about just facing him. She wasn't putting anybody else in danger but herself, but she was actually, in a way, also extending the danger to other people around her. Halloween Ends had good, interesting scenes. Like there was one where she's even smiling, which I think is a great scene, and then that ends completely, and it's a very heartbreaking scene, which I think that's also awesome. It's sort of what you're saying. She's moving on, but there's still cracks there. But because also the trauma has expanded to the whole city. So it's not hers anymore, which is also why the ending, the part when Michael finally dies, I think it's a great scene. And we see all the town together seeing this because this monster that was only hers, now it's everyone's. And I think it's a great third act. I just feel like it's the third act that is from a different movie. The first two acts are from another.
Yeah.
I feel like they're two different movies and they just mesh them together. That is my biggest issue with it. But I feel like Ends has, theoretically, it's great. I read the novelization, and the novelization is way more long, and we get to follow Michael a little bit when he's in hiding. The ending is a little bit more dark, but it's basically the same.
Yeah.
And I think the idea is awesome. I just feel like something in the movie, the way it's executed, just didn't sit well with me.
No, that's fair. That's fair. So I want to hit two things, and then I want to go through a list of the final girls to wrap up. So I want to talk about Gail for just a hot second, and I'm going to add this as a virtue of the final girl, which is the investigation of the mystery of the action. And we see this in Final Girls all the time. We see it, especially like in the 90s, in the Kevin Williamson era, right? We see Urban Legend, played by Alicia Witt. She goes forward and pushes the investigation forward of like, why is this happening? We see this in Julie James, and a lot of people like to hate on Julie James as not being strong, and because Freddie Prinze Jr.'s character saves her, but she's very, very smart, and she's defined by how smart she is. And I think we also see this with Gale Weathers, and that's what makes Gale kind of like revolutionary. She was the first final girl to really push the investigation of something forward in this specific way. And that's something that's carried through her through the years, from investigating Rena Reynolds in Hollywood to investigating the mental patients in Scream 7, the Stabathon. That's part of being a final girl, is having and I guess you can relate that to the goodness, is like trying to stop the murders, trying to stop whatever the evil presence is. And I think that's a huge point in Gale Weathers' column as the final girl. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. Because I feel like when you're facing the danger, it's not just going through it. You have to be prepared. And I think like Gale, as a journalist herself, she has to go follow clues, and is the one that actually, in a way, tries to keep things cool. Not following impulse. Even though she may seem impulsive on the scene, I don't think she is that much. I think she actually really tries hard to figure it out. The iconic scene we have in Scream 2 is because she's watching tapes, trying to figure out if we can see someone. She's trying to see beyond what the audience is seeing. And that's why I think her character is so important. And while I may not, Julie James is now in my top 5 for final girls, but I think because the issue we have, at least with her in the first movie, is that she's so focused on knowing what's happening, what they did, that she doesn't focus on what to do once they face whoever's behind it. She's so focused on figuring out, is it David Egan? Who is it? But she's like, okay, but if you find him, what are you going to do? I feel like that's the part she missed in the first movie. Well, in the second one, she's strong. I just don't like the second one. But in the second one, it's a different Julie. She's more resourceful. She tries to find what's in front of her. Well, in the first one, she's kind of like, oh shit, it's this guy. But this guy already has her trapped, basically. So it's not like she has a lot of time to figure stuff out. But she still has a great chase scene in the first one. And I used to hate a lot on Julie, but I respect her.
But Julie represents that moral center, wanting to know who it is, do things by the book. And that's a great trait of the final girl, even in the 90s. So
in the first movie, it shows that, okay, you can just talk this out with the guy. And in the second one, she's already like fighting the guy straight on, because like, okay, I know there's no nice way to get out of this. So I think she's more feisty in that way. And in the third one, well, I consider the last one the third one because the actual third one doesn't exist for me. She decides to just go help this new girl, even though she said she was never going to set foot in that town again, because that's how much of a good person she is. She kind of lived with herself knowing that this girl died and that she knew she was going to die, And she faced a very unexpected villain.
I wanted to bring this up because I kind of, within the context and the conversations of Final Girls, Laurie Strode kind of gets picked on in the original Halloween because Dr. Loomis does save her in a way. She's getting choked out by Michael, and Dr. Loomis comes in with a gun and shoots Michael. And that's how she kind of gets to safety. And we just see her crying, and that's what the last thing we see of her. It's interesting that compare that to 20 years later with Scream, and Sydney is in a similar, not as dire of a situation maybe, with Billy Loomis, and Gail Weathers is the one that comes and shoots Billy, and that's how Sydney gets to safety. I think it's so interesting from a feminist perspective, the gender swap there. Like, that's where I'm like, ooh, that's interesting. She's not saved by a man. She's saved by another woman. So I think to make Sydney and Gail co-final girls and have this really complex relationship with them over the years, that to me, the fact that Gail saves Sydney, and it's a woman saving another woman, that kind of bonds them as final girl sisters in a way. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I feel like the bond that they have, especially in the original trilogy, it's not like they're friends or they're close to each other because they're incredibly different. And they both see what they went through differently as well. But they bond because they know there's something, they can trust each other when it comes to a situation of danger. And they ended up killing the bad guy together several times. And I really like that take of like Scream also has someone shooting the bad guy for the final girl, but this time it's a woman. And that's also a very interesting take because a woman saving another woman, that's also very progressive if you think about it, especially in the 90s.
Okay. I want to go through and just kind of like show an evolution of the final girls from the beginning to now. Okay. So in the 70s, we have Sally Hardesty from Texas Chainsaw. We have Jess from Black Christmas. We have Laurie Strode from Halloween, and we can count Ellen Ripley in there. She kind of fits in that mold, but not really. So Sally and Laurie, they both kind of survive just through endurance. Jess and Black Christmas, that's a very strange movie and a strange slasher compared to like more of the formulaic slashers we're used to. But even like, there's something so scrappy and female empowerment about Black Christmas because Jess, her whole storyline is she wants to have an abortion. And so it's about her agency. Like, she's already showing that she's a little bit different, right? From the other girls. It's like she's, so that's very interesting. Then in the 80s, it transitions more to like with the Friday the 13th girls. There's more of like a moral purity. There's more of just like intelligence is about fighting back. With Nancy, we see this drastic change in her, but it's also with Nancy, she's confronting sins of her parents. And like it's Nancy trying to kind of like be good, if that makes sense. And then in the 90s is whenever it becomes more progressive, more feminist, like we were describing with Sydney and Gail. There's a self-awareness there. There's more of an arc, of an evolution with both of them. And they also challenge different things, different norms for women, right? And then you also have, like I kind of said, Julie James and Alicia Witt from Urban Legend. Like there's like a investigative, like we're pushing forward intellectually, like we're taking an active role in trying to stop it. And then you have like some okay final girls in the 2000s, like Naomi Watts from The Ring or Sarah Michelle Gellar in The Grudge. Kind of vanilla, in my opinion, compared to the rest. But then I think that we're in this new era where either you have characters like Sydney and Gail and Laurie Strode, in the requels, where they're showing that you can be a final girl later in life and what that looks like, all these years later. Or you get kind of these darker, edgier, kind of weirdo characters like Maxine from X, or you get Grace, who she's kind of an outsider. She's not financially wealthy, and she's marrying into wealth, but then she's forced to become animalistic, and there's kind of like an edginess about her. And then you have Sam, of course, who is rebellious. She has dark impulses, and she survives by embracing her darkness, as opposed to Sydney. So we're in a weird place where we're having like darker final girls or kind of edgier final girls, but also then you still have the Sydney Prescotts and the Laurie Strodes and the Gail Weathers. So, and the Tatums. Tatum is a throwback to the 1970s. It's almost like we're making a big circle coming back to where we started.
Absolutely. I feel like sometimes what happens with the recent films is that they're trying to do kind of what the opposite of what we talked about earlier, be like the final girl is this good girl, so she doesn't fit in. In this case, we're trying to go more like, oh, the final girl is just so evil, she's edgy, she's different. That's why she doesn't fit, and that's why darkness comes to her. But I feel like that's not as layer as sometimes people like to believe. It's funny when you watch, Happy Death Day. It's a great take, for example, because Tree is a woman that she's not doing things that a good girl does, for one thing, in her college life. At the same time, she, even though from the outside it might seem like she fit in that house with all those mean fraternity sisters, she doesn't. And she knows she doesn't. But she kind of like molds herself to it because she knows that's where she lives. That's her present. That's what she has to do. And maybe the surrounding is also what's leading her to make bad choices, like sleeping with her professor and stuff. But as we see her grow through the movie, we start to see that she's coming up to her own decisions and be like, she's trying not to fill any mold. She's trying to be just herself. And that's, I think, but she's some more layer final girl in the last few years, other than just, oh no, she's just a bad girl. That's why she's a final girl. Because not all final girls have to be good, which is true. They don't. But I think you don't, the matter about the final girl is not that she's good, it's that she's real. And not everybody is completely good or completely bad. That's why sometimes maybe like the Maxine movies sometimes don't work for me that much. I mean, they're fun, but there's just something about, you need to like also the final girl, and not all the time, but a little bit at least. And I don't think Maxine, it's likable. I mean, she's likable in how mean she is and how be like, wow, I wish I could say things like that, but you're not exactly likable. Well, Tree is annoying at the beginning of the movie, but she is, and you may not like her and be like, oh, if I'd been to college with that girl, I would have hated her. But what you see, this one you see by the end is a very different one, and is one you actually want to be friends with. And in the second one, she's also very awesome as she's faced with a new challenge and a new grief that she had, and that makes her even more complex. And that's why I think she's a very cool, and I hope we see her in a third film as she gets her trilogy. She deserves her trilogy.
Yeah. I think that you hit the nail on the head about being likable, because I think if you go back to all of those traits that we talked about, the characteristics of a final girl, in the end, we like the final girls. We like Laurie Strode. We like Sydney. We like Nancy. We're supposed to like Julie. Whether you like her or not, that's your prerogative. But we're supposed to be on their side. And I think that's really important. And I think that's why Sam challenges me. And I, to your point, Maxine, I like those three films. I'm not in love with them. I think they're very edgy. Maxine, I think she's kind of a weirdo. Like, I don't look at her and I don't think like, ooh, she's so likable. I think, Mia Goth is a very good actress, but it doesn't feel like home, if that makes sense. Those films, those feel like critics' picks for horror. I don't know.
Well, absolutely. But, well, Natalie in Her Religious is also very likable, and she made a huge mistake, but she's regretting that and be like, oh, she's kind of tried to live with that, and then someone else is doing that, to hurt her. But the fact that she has her guilt carrying with her, it's what makes her also so likable. Even if you think, oh, why did you put yourself in that situation in the first place? But well, because she made a mistake.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to it's interesting to think about the idea and concept of mistakes. Because like Laurie Strode in Halloween H2O, my favorite version of her, Michael is trying to tug at her heartstrings and like he puts his arm out, right, for her. And she thinks to, but then she stops herself and she cuts his head off. And like that, I think, is a good example of like the Sydney and Scream 3 that we were talking about, like that extra layer of intelligence to survive. It's not just the physical aspect of surviving, it's also the strategy of not being duped by the killer.
Exactly. It's like, okay, we reached this far. There's no point in going back. I'm not going to reach his hand.
Is there any, and I know you mentioned Tree, so if she was your answer, I'm sorry for waiting, but is there a final girl that we haven't discussed here today that you find to be really underrated, or one that people don't pay attention to or may not even know about,
Well, I think Jess, it's always going to be underrated. Like, we don't talk enough about how amazing she is and how meaningful Black Christmas is, and how all the meaning behind like the setting, the killer, all the girls and all that. I think I could talk about that movie forever. But something more new, I'll say the movie Hunt that came in 2019. The main character's named Harper. I don't know if you've seen that one. It's about all this group of friends on Halloween. They go into this haunted place and they're all this cool killer with these cool masks and stuff and chasing them. And she's a very, very cool character because she is trying to get out of an abusive relationship. Every time she sees someone dressed in this Halloween gear, she sees her boyfriend. There's actually a scene where she's kind of like cornered by one of the bad guys and she says, please don't hurt me. I don't remember the name of the boyfriend, but she says the boyfriend's name because she already has a demon, and there's we get some flashback of her childhood and how everything's tied together, how she's kind of repeating the same pattern. But we also know that she doesn't go back home anymore because she can't face her mom. And she uses all that trauma that is not related to what's happening in the movie to become stronger, because she uses those flashbacks, she uses those moment of weaknesses, she uses knowing what a bad person wants against them. and she outsmarts them over and over. And they outsmart her too at some point because she goes through a lot of physical pain as well. And there's a lot of time when you think, oh, she got it, and then she didn't. She fell into another trap. So I think that's also a very layered, and the fact that we're in a haunted house when the rooms change, I feel like that's kind of like her life in that movie. And I feel like that's a great movie. I feel like the fact that it was low budget, that is indie and didn't get a wide release, it may not be like visually as amazing as a Scream film, but I think it deserves more attention.
Now, I've seen it actually, and I agree with you. I think that she was a really good character. So mine, I have two, and they're from like the mid 2000s, which I didn't really talk about much because I think that the mid 2000s just kind of carry over the tradition of Scream, in a way. And I don't even want to get into the remakes. That would be, a whole other kind of worms. But so my two are going to be Rachel McAdams' character in Red Eye. Her name's Lisa, and Wes Craven film. It's not a slasher per se. It's more of a thriller, but she is by all counts a final girl. The personality, the evolution. She's kind of like described as like someone who is a work-obsessed workaholic. She's really good at her job. She doesn't really drink. She has past trauma that she hasn't really dealt with. And we see her in very vulnerable situations, and she tries to get out of those situations, but the villain in that movie continues to beat her. And she's trying and she's trying. And it's not until the end where she gets to be ferocious and she just emerges and really fights back at him in every way. She just beats him down, beats him. And it's just an amazing character, an amazing performance. And again, Wes Craven did Final Girls, I think, better than literally anybody. And my second one is a movie that no one has even seen, okay? So it's called The Return. It came out in 2006. It's starring Sarah Michelle Gellar, and it's a supernatural thriller. Her character's name is Joanna Mills. It's played by Sarah Michelle Gellar. She has dark hair, which is a huge divergence from her traditional Buffy blonde, right? With this character, she's haunted by this car accident from the past where a woman died after being sexually assaulted. Sarah Michelle Gellar has to kind of put together the pieces of the mystery, and then she is confronted with that same guy who committed the sexual assault to begin with. She is able to kill him and kind of stop the curse. So there's a lot of the traits that we've talked about with the final girl overall can be found in this character, and it's just a very underrated performance by Sarah Michelle Gellar, and I wish more people had seen this movie.
It's very layered as well, yeah, because she's also a character that at the first sight you think she's very weak. Yeah. And everybody else it looks stronger than her, but she's still in her own way. She's facing it. She's facing the danger, and it's a very the kind of like the battle and the climax was actually very scary for me the first time I watched it. I watched it as soon as it came out. I remember, and I think it was great. I think it was a great climax. Yeah, it's a very underrated film.
That it's a very scary movie. Like the way that this film is shot, like the cinematography is some of the most beautiful I've seen in an independent horror film. But it's really scary, and like the character too. She's also presented as I guess maybe the theme of 2000s Final Girls was the workaholic final girl, because Joanna Mills here in The Return, like Rachel McAdams in Red Eye, she was also seen as someone who's really good at her job and she's focused on her career and she's pushing, but she has this haunted part of her that she doesn't really deal with. So there you go. We figured out what the 2000s Final Girl was.
It's an interesting theme because they're moving on with their lives, but there's still something holding them back. And until they don't face them, they're not going to know. One of my favorite scenes in The Return is when she's under the bed. That was a very scary scene to watch when I was a kid. Yeah. But yeah, that was a very cool. I actually never considered Joanna like as a final girl because I always found that film to be kind of different. But it is. I mean, she has all the traits, and you have a very specific thread that guy is a killer after all. Mm-hmm. So, and they have a very strong battle, and it's a woman that when you see her in the first scenes and stuff, be like, why should I care about this girl? Yeah. And you do, before you know it, you do be like, oh no, girl, get out of there. Get out of the bed.
So as we wrap up this discussion, I also want to pivot to the future because there's a final girl that we haven't talked about yet. We got our first taste of her, but I'm looking forward to seeing more of her. That is Tatum Evans. We met her in Scream 7. She's Sidney Prescott's daughter. Looking ahead, what the future could make for her as a final girl.
I think it will be interesting to see her having a strong bond with her family, but also living her own life. Maybe already living away, doing her own stuff, having a very group of friends that her parents don't know about, but also taking self-defense classes, being more cautious with the people that she's surrounded with. A Tatum that feels solid on her own, but that still, that doesn't mean that she's still not bonded with her mom and that she doesn't still trust them and her dad, which I think was a great move not to kill, not just because Joel McHale is hot, but also because it's a great take for her not to just have the mom and the girl. Be like, we can have like them, a family fighting Ghostface. I think that could be very cool. If she needs them, they're going to be there. But whatever threat comes at her in Scream 8, she could handle it herself, but Mama Sydney has to come. Well, she'll be more than welcome.
Exactly. I agree with you. I guess with Tatum, my favorite thing about her was how vulnerable they let her be in Scream 7 and how realistic that was. And I just don't want to lose that, because like it's so easy to go two-dimensional girl boss. And I think that was the problem with Sam at times, but going in Scream 6 is like sometimes she just felt too much like a superhero. I still want to see that vulnerability in Tatum that we see. Like, Tatum is very strong, even though she claims to be shy and gentle and and not have the confidence of her mom. When push comes to shove, she instinctually can do it. I want to see her evolved, but I want to see her still very human and very much like a real person, like Laurie Strode in 78. You know what I mean?
She's going to become more layered as we see her. I think she's going to be tougher, but it's important to still see her vulnerable side. And that, maybe she's living life trying to move on from her life, sort of like Sydney tried to do in Scream 2, but she realizes that she cannot run away from who she is or what people really want from her. Because if they really want the new Sydney, she's really had to toughen up. Yeah, I don't think she's going to carry a gun with her anymore, but maybe she won't doubt in the next movie and the moment she has to shoot, You never know. I think what I like sometimes in Scream is that we see the changes in subtle details. It's not so obvious, which I think like sometimes from 5 to 6, they moved also like very abruptly from one end to the other instead of going a little bit more slower. But I have faith that they're going to go a different route in Scream 8. And hopefully, I think either way, if it's both Tatum and Sydney together, or just Tatum, or I don't know if maybe they'll go back to Sydney, but either way, I think it's going to work. Yeah. I feel I have faith in the way that they're going to move forward. And I think it's great that they're letting Neve Campbell have her opinions on it, because also the character is who she is, thanks to her performance and her dedication to the character.
Yeah. Well, and isn't it interesting? Like sometimes when actors get involved, sometimes it can be a detriment, because if actors bring too much of like an idea, sometimes it can hurt the project. So, and I'll give you the perfect example. Jamie Lee Curtis, you mentioned earlier, like, oh, well, they already did the alcoholic thing in Halloween H2O. Like, why do it again in 2018? It's because Jamie Lee Curtis was insistent on that. She had that vision. She wanted Laurie to be this really over-the-top, extreme person, on the edge. Mm-hmm. And so she got her wish, but, with Neve, I feel like Neve instinctually knows the character really well. I think the character we see of Sydney in Scream 7, a lot of which Kevin has told us that Neve had inputs. Like they sat while he was typing and she was talking and like had very specific ideas about Sydney's personality. All of that works. So I think that Neve has proven that she has the right instincts when it comes to Sydney. I mean, she literally proved it when she walked away from Scream 6 when it didn't feel right for her. So I trust Neve.
Yeah, no, it depends also on the actors and their take. The thing also with Halloween, though, is that Laurie, if you think about it, there's a lot of stuff that we think we know about Laurie, but we don't see her really that much in the original franchise. I mean, she's in the first movie, she's in the second film, but also her role is not that important. We know that about that bond with Michael. But then in the rest of the films, they went with different characters because Jamie Lee Curtis didn't come back. So Laurie still was a very interesting character that, from what happened from the first movie, we could have gone either way. She could have gone crazy. She could have gone any single way. So when we have H2O, I feel like the reaction was very original and it was very refreshing. And when it happened in 2018, it felt kind of the same, maybe a little more extreme. But that was not necessarily the thing that bothered me the most about 2018. It's a very different take, though. Even though she struggles the same thing, the take is very different. And I think that's part of Jamie Lee Curtis' part. And maybe that's why it's the best out of the three.
So I have to ask one last question, okay? Do we count Buffy as a final girl?
Ooh, that's very interesting. Well, I count her as everything. She's the final everything for me. But I think so. I think Buffy always finds new vulnerabilities in her life. Mm-hmm. And each monster finds something new to attack her with. And she always comes out very heroic, but different, because she's not a superhero, even though sometimes we describe her as such because that's how meaningful she is to us. But she is a person. And we see her having very personal struggles as well through the seasons. She has very specific villains in each one, But, in the first 3 seasons, she's struggling through high school. She's going through the dating situation. In season 5, she has to go through this awful grief, taking care of her sister after losing her mom. In 6, she's having this, actually season 6 is so hard for me to watch, and it's my favorite season. But because we see Buffy in such a hard place, and it's such a dark place, because she's back from the world. She doesn't want to be back in this world, and she feels guilty because she has all the people that love her, and she doesn't see her, and she involved herself in this toxic relationship. But I love in the final episode when after the world is safe and such, she starts crying and she tells Dawn, I want to show you the world, because she realizes that she was trying to protect everybody and actually just isolating herself and actually making the rest of them suffer as well, because she was suffering, but she wouldn't tell them she was suffering. And in season 7, she's more is what she looks the most like a superhero, because she takes this role of being a leader.
Mhm.
She's helping Dawn fight demons, and then she gets all the potentials in her house. She's training them to be a slayer. And I love those episodes when she's like training them in the cemeteries and stuff, being like, oh my God, like full circle. She was one of those girls standing next to it in season 1, and now she's the one leading the class, if you will. But she's still very vulnerable because she still fears the end of the world. And she's still fearful that the world is going to end. And I feel like it's amazing in the ending when she looks back and is like, Sunnydale is gone, but she pushed through it. The world didn't end. So she has a lot of fears that makes her a very human hero. And that's, I think, the big difference. And to me, yeah, she's a final girl. Yeah, she might be stronger, because she was chosen one. She has the supernatural abilities. So she's stronger than a regular human, but she's still a final girl because she's still a human.
Perfect, flawless, no notes. Also, I will say, I was thinking about this while you were talking. Once you said like season 6 is also my favorite. I think that season 6 is Buffy's equivalent of Sydney's Scream 3, if that makes sense. Like that darkness,
Yeah.
like that emotional moment.
It does.
So I just wrote down quickly, I just want to get your thoughts on this. If we had to match up and correlate the Sydney stories with the Buffy stories, okay? Just go with me here. So Buffy season 1, like her journey, who she is, would be equivalent to the Sydney Prescott in the prequel era, before in the Maureen Prescott murders. Like that's like Buffy season 1 is whenever Sydney's mom died, okay? Buffy season 2's story, that version of Sydney is Sydney in Scream 1, because there is a darkness, there is an edginess, but she's also dealing with her boyfriend. So there you go.
Yeah.
So Scream 2 Sydney, I matched up with Buffy in season 4 because of the college aspect, but I'm not really committed to that. That's my one I feel the least attached to here.
Yeah, well, but it does fit. I mean, we see a different Buffy in season 4. She's a more confident one, and she deals with heartache and stuff. I think she started to realize how different life works outside of high school, and I think that's very interesting.
And then, of course, Sydney in Scream 3 is Buffy in season 6. And with that, because you talked about like going from season 6 to 7 for Buffy, that's what inspired me to write this little list right here. If Sydney 3 equals Buffy 6, then Sydney in Scream 4 is Buffy in season 7. It's that materialization of the superhero. In Scream 4, we see a lot more internalization too, but for season 3, I think we could correlate Buffy to Sydney in Scream 5, because you have the central storyline there is that Faith is kind of like the bad slayer. Buffy's the good slayer. It's very similar to Sam as like the bad final girl in Scream 5 and versus Sydney, the good final girl. And then from there, I matched up season 5 of Buffy to Sydney in Scream 7 because of the domestic and the weight of Dawn and how much Buffy's willing to sacrifice herself for her sister is Sydney and her daughter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also the whole idea of death. Death is your gift. It's kind of like trauma is your life situation.
Exactly. So, wow, that was fun. I loved matching those two up. So, thanks for the little detour. And I agree, Buffy is the final girl.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, right? Because Buffy, she was there. She's part of the Sydney era. She's part of the Scream era. She's part of like the era of final girls that Clover in her essay didn't take into account, that she didn't know about, that didn't exist when she wrote that essay. I love that Buffy gets to go along with Sydney and Gale and kind of fit in this version of a final girl that's very real, self-aware, and powerful in a different way.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's how meaningful it is a character can be, or a movie or show, because like the genre was one way until this movie came out and changed the whole rules. And I think that's what both Scream and Buffy did. One in cinema and the other one in television. So I think that's amazing.
Awesome. Well, Isa, thank you so much for this wonderful episode. Please tell everybody where they can find you online.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I'm Call Me by Isa. You can find me there, talking all things horror, and Sarah Michelle Gellar.
And Sarah Michelle Gellar. I love it. So, hello, everybody. Welcome to the next segment of Scream with Ryan C. Showers. I'm your host, Ryan C. Showers. Everyone, please welcome my friend to join me for this Taylor Swift song of the week, Ashely. Hey, Ash.
Hello, Ryan.
Well, I'm kind of scared.
Are you? Is it
Yeah.
because of me?
I think so.
Hey, who's afraid of little old me? Little chubster over here.
No, honestly, it is like the Canadian nice, right? It's like we're nice until we're not. I'm just teasing.
Yeah, I know. It's just like, why would you ever be afraid of me? As I smile like one of the girl from The Purge.
Oh my
Or
gosh.
smile, I guess. One of them.
Yeah, literally smile. Ash, what is the Taylor Swift song of the week?
The Taylor Swift song of the week is Who's Afraid of Little Old Me. This song is off of the Tortured Poets Department. It was produced by Taylor Swift and Jack Antonoff, written by Taylor. Track 10. To me, this song is about womanhood and the Taylor's pains of growing up in the spotlight, but really just about like being underestimated and then feared for achieving something.
When the Tortured Poets Department came out, I didn't get to listen like at midnight, and you messaged me, Who's Afraid of Little Old Me is going to be a Ryan song. And you were so right. It absolutely was. It was my favorite song from the Tortured Poets Department for a while. It's not my number one anymore, but it's in my top 5 for sure. I personally could identify with it. Like, this also came to me like whenever I was kind of like in the middle of the Melissa stuff, for lack of a better phrase, where I felt just completely like under the microscope and everyone was just kind of poking at me and like wanting to haze me and see me lash out emotionally and like whatever. I identified with it on that level. I have always thought this is just an amazing, amazing song. So, Ash, what are your thoughts on Who's Afraid of Little Old Me?
The first time that I heard it, I immediately imagined Buffy Summers. Like, to me, like, obviously this is like a Final Girl Scream song to me as well. But the first time that I heard it, I really was picturing Buffy, just because I think it just is. I mean, like she's up there with like one of my favorite people. There is something about like the songs that are meant to be like empowering sometimes come across like I just like don't love them all the time, but this song is so good. And I love how she's saying, well, who's afraid of little old me? Because like that is something that like a lot of women here is like we're taught constantly to protect ourselves, and like if you don't do these things, like you're bad. Like, oh, if you don't lock your doors when you get into your car, if you don't watch your drink, if you don't do this, if you don't dress appropriately, if you don't do this, like you get what's coming to you. But then when you stand up for yourself, it's like, whoa, calm down over there. I feel like that song puts that rage, like that frustration out. She's not being like, I'm going to go kick all of your asses. There's something about this song that feels like so loving, but also like so rageful. And I love it so much.
Well, and it's also, I feel like there's a transformation here, and Taylor's describing what it's like to kind of be somebody, or to be even a woman, I guess, who kind of gets just beat up by the world. And kind of like the contradictions that the world puts on women, especially women like in the public eye, like Taylor and like Final Girls. And like, I think Taylor kind of describes a transformation that Final Girls kind of undergo in order to survive. They get pushed to the very edge and to the very end of the movie, right? And I think that in addition, like sometimes they're even judged by everybody, or they're judged by the villain. And in this song, Taylor's talking about like what she has been through uniquely as a woman in the music industry, where, whether she shows up to an event can move the market. Right? I mean, like there's so much emphasis and focus on her, and therefore the criticism on her is often crazy and unfair and misogynistic and sexist. And it's a very unique, individualized thing. I love that you brought up Buffy, because it is, this is a kind of a Buffy Summers thing. And even like the whole joke, the wink wink of the title of the song, Who's Afraid of Little Old Me? You should be, right? It's like, the whole facade of Buffy is like, oh, it's this one short blonde girl, like who could be afraid of her? And it's like, no, you should be, And I think that Taylor kind of like, because there's like a one girl in all the world kind of vibe to Buffy, you can kind of see it in this song. And the final girl, if that makes sense. Like a lot of times, like the final girl is supposed to be individual, is supposed to be the one person who's able to take down the killer. I think that all of that kind of comes together here, and why it's kind of the perfect song for this week. In addition, Taylor this is a solo writing credit for her. It's kind of like she is being a final girl in some way.
This song, what I imagine when I hear it is there's Taylor Swift, and then there's the devil on her shoulder, and then there's like the angel on her shoulder, almost like these two people in her mind, which could be Gail Weathers and Sidney Prescott, also. And just like, because like there's like the parts where it's like, so they tell me everything is not about me. And they're like, but what if it is? And then like, you know what I mean? Like there's like, it's almost like her thoughts are coming out and it's like, they said they didn't do it to hurt me. But what if they did? Like, it's just like, or when it's just like, you should be, like, I imagine it first being like the devil on her shoulder being like, well, you should be. And then by the end of it, it's the angel being like, fucking should be. Like they're all saying that you should be. Like, I imagine kind of like there's like 3 versions of her and she's like her rage and like her humility or like what she thinks she's supposed to be. And like her empathy, but rage and empathy go hand in hand. So altogether, they make this song.
This song features some really great writing from Taylor. Like, I love the idea that like there's like she starts out the song by saying, "My bare hands paved your path," meaning because she went through this as like one of like the first women, or a woman at this level for the first time. She's paving the path for everyone who would follow her. And in a way, I see this as like Jamie Lee Curtis, as Neve Campbell, who really created the mold of a final girl and what a final girl can be in a large, long-running franchise. And Taylor says, you don't get to tell me about that, meaning like, final girls get to determine their story. It's not going to be defined by the villain or the evil guy. It's defined by the hero. And that's partly what I love about the concept of a final girl,
No, completely. Like, I love how it's like, I feel like everybody interprets this saying differently, but like, I've always thought like somebody walks so other people can run, right? Like literally, like I imagine her like literally paving a path so that people can walk behind her, but literally like the people who are benefiting from her, who are like making money off of her and then are also being like, oh, well, you're sad about your success. And she's like, no, I'm sad about like the weird shit about it. Like, this is a weird spot to be in. It's like being like telling Sydney, like, she can't be sad because she wrote a book. It's like being like, well, you made a lot of money off of your book, so you shouldn't be sad about what happened anymore. It's like, my friend was murdered with a garage door, you fucker. Like, I'm allowed to be sad about that. That's weird. Do you know anybody else that's happened to?
No,
like,
exactly.
You know what I mean?
The thing I like about this song too is it really, Taylor gives credit to those feelings about being a woman and being in this unique situation of trauma, where it changes you and you're not really in control of how it changes you, at least at first. And she's commenting on the comments about her. So, the observations that people make, all the while acknowledging like how unfair it is, how this wasn't really a choice, that you lured me, you hurt me, you taught me, you caged me, and then you had the audacity to call me crazy. You know what I mean? I think Taylor's doing with all this, like by acknowledging like the step by step, is she's acknowledging the source of the pain. You know what I mean? But and also the judgment. Like, how dare you call me crazy? How dare you say these things to me? You make me feel bad, and then you kind of push and push and push. You make jokes about me. You make jokes. Is it a wonder that I broke? Is it a wonder that I feel this way? So I think like that element of being a final girl and going through these impossible situations, Taylor really captures that in this song,
Yeah, I think she does a beautiful way of saying like, I'm still a person, like I'm still allowed to feel emotions and I'm still allowed to be upset when a bunch of people are calling me names. Like, it's with great, like obviously she's got great success and like, I don't, like, it would be annoying if she was complaining about her car not starting, because it would be like, girl, okay, like you can call any, like you can just like let her go buy a new one. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that would be, she was writing a song about that, but writing a song about the fact that people are judging her for things that literally just don't make any sense. Like, I love criticism that is fair, and when people deserve to be criticized, I think that's great, especially people in the public eye. But to criticize people for things that don't make sense is just so, like, for dating, like, she's not skinny enough, she's this, or she's not that, she's too big. I think anybody can relate to that. But there is something that she just really captures, like the anger, like literally the rage that some of us feel.
Also, I love the way that she comments on being drunk on your own tears. And it's like, oh, it's like when the final girls try to talk about their trauma and what's happened to them. People are saying, oh, well, whatever. They're just, it's whatever. But, I think for me, the bridge of Who's Afraid of Little Me is the big thing. You already referenced some of it. So tell me if everything's not about me, but what if it is? Which I find just to be like the most hilarious lyric in this song, because it's so apt, and it's Taylor being so self-aware how when she does make any move, when she moves her eyes, it's like breaking national headlines. So maybe it is all about her. Maybe it really truly is. And it is kind of the same thing about the final girls. Like you referenced, like, Sydney could look at Jill, could look at Roman and be like, so, but what if it is? What if it is all about me? And it's just interesting the way that like she goes through these lyrics and like talks about like what her inner feelings, like her id, for lack of a better phrase, wants to be. I want to snarl and show you how much this has disturbed me. But also she admits, like she also says this, and I agree with this as it pertains to Final Girls. You went and last an hour in the asylum where they raised me. That's so true in terms of like, imagine anyone else going through what Sydney goes through. And Tatum, I think, learns this in Scream 7, is like the asylum where her mom was raised, and the fear of someone trying to kill you, to physically hunting you down, killing all of your friends.
I love when we talk about this because sometimes I'm like, I've never thought of it like that.
And, it's interesting because you could look at this as a Maureen Prescott song too, in terms of like, imagine everything that she went through in Hollywood and the horrific crimes that she endured to her person and all of the trauma that she underwent and the way everyone talked about her behind her back and slut shamed her. And then after the fact, after her death especially, it's like she says, Taylor sings that, I'm always drunk on my own tears. Isn't that what they all said? That I'll sue you if you step on my lawn. That I'm fearsome and I'm wretched and I'm wrong. Yet, here's the kicker. This could apply to Maureen, this could apply to Sydney, or any of the final girls who the killer is after because of a specific beef. Put narcotics into all of my songs. That's why you're still singing along. It speaks to like the obsession with them. You criticize them and you talk about them and like they motivate you to do so much because you're obsessed with them. Like you're still singing along even if you hate them.
Yeah, I love when she says like put narcotics in all of my songs because it's literally being like, well, how could this woman possibly be this successful this long? She has to be doing something to be manipulative. And like people literally say that they're like, I don't get what she does like to do like she like uses like these types of beats to like, oh, and she does this and this and this to manipulate people. She manipulates people like with like her storytelling. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
There are male singers that have literally murdered people or beat up other famous singers, and we still are like, yeah, it's okay, they're famous.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to like her, but to question someone's talent is such a thing that I think all women understand because it comes from being like, she deserved it, what she got in a bad way. But it also is like, well, what did she do to earn this? Like, what did she do to become as successful as she is? And it's like, she tried. I don't know. And it's also like, I'm just like, people don't really question that for a lot of
Men.
a lot of dudes. And like, it's just really frustrating. And I think sometimes like when you're a girl, like you see it a lot more. And then when we do talk about it, people roll their eyes at us. So they're like, oh, like you're talking about this all the time. Like you're drunk on your own tears. And I'm like, oh my God, on your own fictional muscles, dude.
Well, and it's so interesting too, as it relates to the final girl. I love that Taylor, recently in the New York Times interview that she did, she talked about how obsessed she is with like, or not obsessed, but like, in a good, healthy way with her songs. She likes to rewrite endings and like take on like character personas. And I feel like she does that with the Salem Witches, the Salem Witch trial here, because she literally writes, so I leap from the gallows, meaning she's kind of rewriting their history, but also in the same time, she's also kind of talking about them in their own ways. Maybe they're kind of like final girls and they face similar rumors of the lies about them. So it's just interesting from that perspective. But I also like that Taylor makes it so that like the attention is all on the narrator of the song. There's a line where she talks about like a record scratch and I scream, which again, scream, final girl, ha. But a record scratch, it makes everybody look up at a party. And that's what a final girl is. She kind of pops out. She's the one kind of who everyone pays attention to. And honestly, I think that like watching it on the Eras Tour documentary this past December, seeing it performed live, I actually think it's better performed live than it is even as the record. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, I completely agree. When she is singing that song, like you're just enamored by her because you're just like, oh, this feels like having like all of these people like scream like this like angry song. And like obviously there's a lot of women there, but there's a lot of guys there too that are just as frustrated by the state of the world with those women.
Mm-hmm.
And they it's one of those things where like they're like, I might not get it, but I've got you. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And be like, I might not fully understand what she's talking about, but I can empathize and I can relate. And I think that's like one of the best things we can all do for each other, because we can't always understand exactly what it's like to be each other, but being there for each other. But one of my favorite lines is, I was tame, I was gentle, so the circus life made me mean. Don't you worry, folks. We took out all of her teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And like I just like love that line of like how deep I think it goes, because it's being like, I was what a girl is supposed to be. I was tame, I was gentle,
Mm-hmm.
but then the world made me mean because of all the things that went through it. But don't worry, guys. We're going to push her down even farther, because like we can't have her be angry, even though somebody did something fucked up or whatever. And I love that line so much. I just think it's perfect. Like that's like those were the lines that like really made me think of Buffy, and it makes me think of Sid and Dale, of like being like, I was gentle, but like literally be like in your soul too, like being like, I was a gentle, kind person until all of you just like made me mean for some
Mm-hmm.
reason.
Ash, thank you so much for coming and talking about this wonderful song from the Tortured Poets Department.
All copyrighted material used or referenced in this show belong to their rightful owners and made possible by the Fair Use Act.
And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back.
Get another beer, you want one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back!
Dear God, Ryan,